My days now stretch on endlessly. It's a strange feeling when the clock ticks, but time seems to stand still. It's been 3 months since I buried Roland. 3 months alone in this house where every corner reminds me of him. The morning begins as usual. I wake up at 6 o'clock, turning to his side of the bed out of habit. It is empty, always empty. Sometimes I reach out and touch the cold pillow, as if I can feel the ghost of his warmth. 43 years together isn't just a habit, it's like breathing. When you stop, life ends. But somehow mine continues. I get up, put on my robe, and go into the kitchen. I make tea, just 1 cup. Roland liked coffee, strong, with a pinch of cinnamon. I never drank it, but I made it for him every morning. Now the coffee pot sits untouched on the top shelf of the closet. I couldn't put it away, like so many other things. Terre Haute has never been a noisy town, but our neighborhood on the outskirts is especially quiet, especially this time of year, as fall slowly turns to winter. The trees outside the window are nearly bare, their skeletons looming against the pale morning sky. Roland loved fall, said it was a time of reflection and preparation for rest. It was as if he knew it was the time he would leave. I sit in his chair, another new habit, and look out at the garden. Once manicured, it is now slowly going wild. I don't have the energy to tend it. Maybe in the spring. Maybe never. The phone rings unexpectedly, breaking my stupor. I don't rush to answer it. Few people call me now. Friends have drifted away, some out of sensitivity, some out of fear of other people's grief. My son. Dexler called twice in 3 months. Both times the conversation was short and awkward. A name pops up on the screen. Siobhan, my daughter-in-law. This is unexpected. She almost never calls me directly. Eloise? Her voice sounds formal, with that special note of condescension she always uses when talking to me. I hope I'm not distracting you from something important. That tone. It's like I'm an old cat who's being tolerated in the house out of mercy. No, Siobhan. To what do I owe the honor? Dexler and I received a letter from Mr. Holdworth. The reading of Roland's will is scheduled for next Thursday, 2 p.m. in his office. You'll get a notice too, of course, but I thought I'd give you a heads up. The will. Of course. I knew this day would come, but somehow I didn't think about it. Maybe I didn't want to think about it. Thanks for the information, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. You're welcome. Her tone is laced with what she probably thinks is sympathy. How are you holding up? Dexler's worried about you. False. If he was really worried, he would have called himself. He'd come over. But he's been looking at the world through Siobhan's eyes for a long time. I'm fine. Tell Dexler I'm fine. I will. And Eloise. There's a pause, like she's searching for words. Don't worry too much about the will. It's just a formality. Roland always said he'd take care of all of us. In all of us, I distinctly hear us, not you. Siobhan has never been able to hide his true thoughts, no matter how hard he tries. After the conversation is over, I sit up, staring at the extinguished screen of my phone. Testament. Roland never particularly talked to me about his financial affairs. Keep your head down, Ellie, he'd say when I asked. Everything will be fine. I've taken care of everything. I'm not afraid of poverty. Roland and I started practically from scratch. When we married, we had nothing but education and ambition. I taught college literature. He started his business with a small antique store. Then came other stores, investments, real estate. Roland was a talented businessman. But money was never the most important thing to us. I get up and walk over to the bookshelf. Among hundreds of volumes, I find a tattered copy of Jane Eyre. Our first meeting was in a college library. I was working on my dissertation on Victorian women writers, and he was looking for a gift for his mother. When he asked me to recommend a book, I held out Jane Eyre to him without hesitation. It's the story of a woman who never gave up her independence and dignity, I said then. He smiled and replied, "You seem to be like that too." 2 months later, we got engaged. I put the book back on the shelf and go into Roland's study. It's a room I rarely went into during his lifetime, and even more rarely after his death. Everything here is untouched. His papers, his books, even the empty coffee cup he left behind the last day he worked here. The day before they took him to the hospital. I don't know what I'm looking for. Maybe a clue as to what's waiting for me in Cedric Holdworth's office. Maybe a last message from my husband. In my desk drawer is an old silver-framed photograph. Roland and little Dexler and I are on a picnic by the lake. Dexler is about 5 years old here, laughing, sandwiched between us in a tight hug. My boy, when did he become such a stranger? I remember how things started to change after he met Siobhan. She came into his life out of the blue, a beautiful, intelligent, ambitious girl from a good family. At first, she was very nice to me and Roland. She came to our dinners, took an interest in my lectures, admired Roland's collection of antiques. "She's too perfect," Roland once told me. "No one is ever that perfect without ulterior motives." I rebuked him for his cynicism, said he was just jealous of his son. Now I know he was right. After the wedding, the mask began to fall. Gradually at first, less frequent calls, short visits, always with excuses as to why they couldn't stay longer. Then more explicitly, critical remarks about our house, about my clothes, about the way we raised Dexler. "You know, Decky says you always pressured him with his studies," she told me one day when we were alone together. "He still feels he never lived up to your expectations." It was a stab in the heart. Dexler was always our pride. Yes, we encouraged him to study, but we never pushed him. I wanted to talk to him about it, but every time I tried, he walked away from the conversation. Over time, Dexler began to adopt Siobhan's views. He began to criticize Roland for his outdated business practices, me for my old-fashioned views. When the twins were born, we were only allowed to see them on special occasions. "They just want to control who influences the children," Roland said, "and we're not on their list of desirable influences." The last time we were all together was Christmas, 6 months before Roland's illness. A tense, awkward dinner. The twins, then 14 years old, barely spoke to us, tucked away on their phones. Siobhan glowered, talking about her boutique, her plans to expand her business. Dexler was nodding along, occasionally casting guilty glances at us. When they left, Roland stared after them for a long time. "They think we've got one foot in the grave," he said, "and they can't wait for the inheritance." "Roland, how can you say that about your own son? Not his son, about his wife, and he's just a weakling, always has been. I hoped it would go away as he got older, but apparently not. I've never seen him so bitter." When Roland got sick, I expected Dexler to spend more time with his father. But he showed up rarely, always briefly, always with Siobhan, who controlled every conversation. In recent weeks, when it became clear that Roland wasn't going to make it, he began to insist on seeing Cedric, his old friend and lawyer. They would talk alone for long periods of time, and when I asked what it was about, Roland would only smile his enigmatic smile. "I just want to make sure everything's okay, Ellie. Don't worry." And now this call from Siobhan. I don't know what to expect from the reading of the will, but something in her voice makes me wary. She's too confident. She's too calm. Like she knows something I don't. I spend all day in a strange state between anxiety and apathy, going through old photos, reading without making sense, cooking dinner that I barely touch. When it gets dark, I turn on all the lamps in the house, fighting the encroaching shadows. At night, I dream of Roland. He's sitting in his office, young as he was when we first got married, writing something. I try to look over his shoulder, but he covers the paper with his hand. It's not time yet, Ellie, he says with a smile. But you'll find out soon enough. I wake up with the first rays of the sun, with the feeling of his presence slowly dissipating in the morning light. For the first time in a long time, I feel something resembling calm. Whatever happens in Cedric Holdworth's office next Thursday, I will meet it with my head held high. Roland wouldn't want me to give up. He never has. I get out of bed and go to make coffee. Just for today, I think, pulling the coffee pot off the shelf. Just for today, I'll make coffee for Roland, with a pinch of cinnamon, just the way he liked it. For the last time, because it's time to move on. It's time to find out what the future holds for me. And somehow, I'm sure Roland has a surprise in store for me. He's always been a master of the unexpected. 3 days until the reading of the will, and I still can't shake the anxiety. Every time I close my eyes, I see Siobhan's face, smug, with a thin smile that never reaches her eyes. It's strange how quickly you can fall out of love with someone you once welcomed into your family with an open heart. Their first meeting with Siobhan was at Lorraine Restaurant, the only truly sophisticated place in Terre Haute. Dexler had insisted on it, though Roland and I would have preferred something less pretentious. "She's special, Mom," he said on the phone then. "I want the first meeting to be perfect." Roland and I arrived 10 minutes early. We waited, nervous as teenagers. Our only son had never before introduced a girl to us, at least not with such excitement in his voice. They entered together, Dexler and a tall, slender blonde with chiseled features. She was wearing an elegant black dress that would have looked appropriate even in New York. She held herself with a casual grace that made me suddenly acutely aware of my own provincialism. "Mom, Dad, this is Siobhan Radley." Dexler glowed with pride as he introduced us to his chosen one. "We've finally met," she said, shaking my hand. "Dexler has told me so much about you, I feel like we already know each other." Her handshake was firm, confident like someone accustomed to making a good first impression. Roland had always said that you could tell a lot about a person by the way they shook hands. I wondered what he had felt then. That evening went flawlessly. Siobhan talked about her designer clothing boutique, her plans for expansion, her family from Pennsylvania, all with charming modesty and light humor. She asked questions about our work, how we met, how we raised Dexler. "You're a literature professor?" "How fascinating," she exclaimed when I mentioned my career. "I've always loved to read. I dreamed of being a writer as a child, but alas, I have more talent for business." By the end of the evening, I was enchanted. Roland seemed pleased too, though more subdued. "What do you think?" I asked him on the way home. "She's flawless," he replied after a pause. "And that's a bad thing?" "No, it's not bad. It's just unusual. People are rarely that flawless." I brushed off his words then. Roland had always been a little suspicious of new people, a trait that helped him in business, but sometimes got in the way in personal relationships. I figured he was just jealous that our boy had found someone special. Over the next few months, Siobhan won us over completely. She came to me for tea and asked me to share family recipes, advised Roland on business matters. She brought little gifts, a book that reminded her of me, an antique cufflink for Roland's collection. When Dexler announced the engagement, we were overjoyed. The wedding was set for the spring, and Siobhan asked me to help with the preparations. "You're the only mother I have right now," she said with tears in her eyes. "My mom would be so happy to see me as a bride." Her parents died in a car accident when she was 19. Another reason my heart opened to her. Preparing for the wedding was the first alarm bell. All my offers were politely but firmly declined. "Oh, Eloise, that's so sweet. But we've already decided otherwise." When I suggested we have the ceremony in our garden where the gorgeous roses were blooming, Siobhan gently explained that they had chosen a fancy country club. My offer to bake a traditional family wedding cake was met with a polite laugh. Dexler was telling me what a wonderful hostess you are, but we've already ordered a dessert from a famous pastry chef in Chicago. The day of the wedding was the first time I noticed the way Dexler looked at her, with adoration bordering on worship. It wasn't just the happiness of a man in love, it was a complete, unconditional surrender. The change began gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, our Sunday lunches became less frequent. Siobhan is so tired at work she needs to recover. Then Dexler started declining invitations to family gatherings, always with plausible excuses. One day, about a year after the wedding, Dexler missed Roland's birthday party. For the first time in his life, called in the morning, apologized. Siobhan had a migraine. He couldn't leave her. But he could have come alone, Roland said in the evening when the guests had dispersed. Just for a couple of hours. What's all this nonsense about migraines? Couldn't she have been alone for 2 hours? I defended them, said they were young, had their own lives, that Dexler was just a caring husband. Roland didn't argue, but I could see he wasn't convinced. When Siobhan announced her pregnancy, we were thrilled. Grandchildren at last, and twins. 2 boys, Calvin and Tristan. Unusual names, but beautiful. During the pregnancy, Siobhan became close to me again, calling, counseling, letting me take care of her. I helped her prepare the nursery, bought tiny socks and overalls, sewed blankets. And then the boys were born and the wall grew back. We were allowed to visit them, but only on a strict schedule. Regimen is very important for babies, Siobhan explained. When I offered to help with the babies, she always found a reason to refuse. She has a nanny, Roland told me. I've seen the bills. Dexler pays thousands of dollars every month, but his own mother can't be with her grandchildren. By the time the boys were 3, I saw them less often than I would have liked, but still regularly. They were adorable little guys, identical in appearance, but so different in personality. Calvin was quiet, thoughtful, with attentive eyes. Tristan was energetic, boisterous, curious. I loved them immensely, even though I felt I didn't know them like a grandmother should. Then there was the day 5-year-old Tristan called me by my first name. Not Grandma, not Nana, but Eloise, like I was an outsider. Siobhan says Grandma sounds old-fashioned and reminds you of old age. Dexler explained to me later when I asked about it. She thinks children would be more comfortable addressing you by your first name. That conversation was one of many where I tried to reach my son. We were sitting in his office, a modern, sterile room, so unlike Roland's cozy office. Dexler, honey, don't you think it's strange that your wife decides what your children should call your mother? He looked past me, tapping his fingers on the table. Mom, please. It's just a name. What difference does it make? Siobhan is very considerate of such things. She thinks traditional family addresses create an unnecessary hierarchy. What do you think? He shrugged. I agree with her. But I could see in his eyes that it wasn't true. He was just avoiding conflict. Always avoided it. After that, the visits became even less frequent. Siobhan always found an excuse. The boys were sick or tired after school or had important classes they couldn't miss. Roland tried to intervene. He invited Dexler to lunch, just the two of them, father and son. He came back darker than a cloud. He's completely under her control, he told me then. I asked him bluntly, why do we barely see our grandchildren? Do you know what he replied? That Siobhan is worried about our conservative influence on the boys, that she wants them to grow up free of outdated ideas about the world. I asked what he meant by that. He started mumbling something about progressive values and modern parenting methods. Roland shook his head. I don't recognize my son, Ellie. This is not the boy we raised. That night I found some old photos. Dexler as a child, a smiling, open to the world kid. He was always sensitive, always trying to please everyone. Maybe that's the root of the problem. Maybe we should have taught him to be harder, more confident. But I knew those thoughts were unfair. We raised him with love, supported his hobbies, rejoiced in his successes, helped him deal with his failures. We gave him everything we could. And then Siobhan came along, and it was like he forgot his whole past life. By the time the twins were 10, the estrangement was almost complete. The only time we saw each other was Christmas and Thanksgiving, and not always. The boys grew up practically not knowing us. They'll regret it someday, Roland said one night as we lay awake. Not the kids, Dexler and Siobhan. Someday they'll realize they stole grandparents from their children, and they stole grandchildren from us. Roland's illness was sudden and relentless. Pancreatic cancer, discovered too late. The doctors immediately said there was little chance, but he fought on. For me, I know. Dexler came to the hospital the day after we got the diagnosis. Alone, without Siobhan. It was a rare moment when I saw a glimpse of the old Dexler, scared, confused, in need of a parent. Is Daddy going to be okay? He asked me in the hallway while Roland slept. He looked so young at that moment, almost like a boy. The doctors are doing everything they can, I replied, unable to tell him the truth. He had to hear it from his father. Roland told him the next day. I was not present when they talked. When I returned to the room, Dexler was sitting by the bedside, holding his father's hand, tears streaming down his face. After that, Siobhan began to appear with him, always impeccably dressed, always with an expression of deep sorrow on her face that seemed as learned as a roll. She brought exotic fruits that Roland couldn't eat, books he was too weak to read, and made small talk as if we were at a tea party rather than in a hospital room. She's waiting for me to die, Roland said to me one day when we were alone, coming to see if it's time to divide the inheritance. Roland, don't say that. You know it's true, Ellie. And Dexler, he only sees what she lets him see. In the last month, Roland was transferred home. Hospice provided a nurse, but the primary care fell on my shoulders. Dexler came every few days, usually for a short time. Siobhan stopped accompanying him, citing business at the boutique. The twins came only once. 14 years old, tall, handsome, but so alien. They stood awkwardly by their grandfather's bedside, not knowing what to say to a dying man they barely knew. I could see the pain in Roland's eyes as he looked at them. My boys, he said, holding out his hand to them. How you have grown. Tristan shrugged with feigned indifference, but Calvin took his hand and squeezed it tightly. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes, regret, understanding, but the moment passed quickly. In those last weeks, Roland had insisted on regular meetings with Cedric Holdworth. They would lock themselves in the study, and I could hear their muffled voices, occasionally interrupted by Roland's faint laughter. "What are you two discussing in there?" I asked once. Roland smiled his enigmatic smile. "Recent business, Ellie." Nothing interesting, but something in his eyes made me wary. He was planning something he didn't want to tell me about. In the last few days, when he was already too weak to get out of bed, Roland had often asked me to read to him. Not business papers or news, but poetry and classic novels, especially Jane Eyre. "Do you remember how we met?" he asked one day when I had finished reading. "Sure do. You were looking for a book for your mom, and you recommended Jane Eyre. Said it was a story about a woman who never gave up her dignity." I nodded, holding back tears. "You're the same way, Ellie. You always have been. even when everyone around you was trying to make you doubt yourself. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength for a man who was so close to the end. Promise me you'll stay that way, that you won't let them break you when I'm gone. Who, them? But he only shook his head and closed his eyes. Roland died on a quiet October morning, in his sleep, holding my hand. His last words, spoken the night before, were, "It's going to be okay, Ellie. I've taken care of everything." At the funeral, Siobhan and Dexler stood beside me, as families should, but they were strangers, two actors playing the roles of grieving relatives. The boys stayed behind, awkward in their black suits. I noticed Calvin furtively wiping away tears. After the ceremony, Siobhan hugged me, a dry, formal hug. "We'll take care of you, Eloise," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry about a thing." There was such condescending confidence in her words that I felt a chill run down my spine. She acted like she was already the mistress of the situation, as if Roland's death made her in charge of the family. When everyone dispersed, I was alone in a house that was suddenly too big and too quiet. That night, I slept in Roland's study, in his chair, surrounded by things that reminded me of him. And now, 3 months later, I'm preparing to meet Cedric Holdworth for the reading of a will that Siobhan is sure will leave me with nothing. But something in Roland's last words, in his enigmatic smile, in those secret meetings with Cedric, makes me think I'm in for a surprise. And maybe I'm not the only one. Thursday morning was overcast. There were heavy clouds in the sky, and a light drizzle, not rain, but enough to make the day dank and uncomfortable. I woke up long before my alarm clock, lying there, staring at the ceiling and mentally replaying the upcoming meeting. The reading of the will, Roland's last official farewell. It took me a long time to decide what to wear. I decided on a dark blue suit, not black, because the mourning period was over, at least officially, but strict enough for the occasion. Roland loved that shade, said it accentuated the color of my eyes. The pearl earrings were his 30th wedding anniversary gift, a thin gold bracelet around my wrist. No ring except my wedding ring. I never took it off. Getting ready much earlier than necessary, I drank a cup of tea, trying to calm my nerves. Scraps of thoughts and memories swirled around in my head. What would Siobhan do if she got the whole fortune? Sell our house? Evict me? Make me give up the things Roland and I had collected over the decades? Number. I won't let myself go into a spiral of anxious thoughts. Whatever happens today, I will face it with dignity. Half an hour before the appointed time, I was already sitting in my car in front of the office building where Cedric's law firm was located. I waited, watching people hurrying down the street, umbrellas and coat collars pulled up to keep out the drizzle. Just an ordinary day for them. Nothing special. Finally, at 10 minutes past 2, I got out of the car and headed for the entrance. Cedric's office was on the 3rd floor, a small but respectable law office specializing in family law. Roland and Cedric had been friends since they were students, and when Cedric opened his own practice, Roland had been one of his first clients. Taking the elevator, I found myself in a reception area with soft lighting and muted beige tones. A young receptionist with neatly gathered hair greeted me with a polite smile. Mrs. Brookhaven? Mr. Holdworth is expecting you. Your family has already arrived. My family. The phrase no longer evoked warmth, only wariness. The receptionist escorted me down a short hallway to an oak door with a sign that read, Cedric Holdworth, Esquire. With a knock, she opened the door and let me inside. The spacious office was furnished in classic style. A massive desk, leather chairs, and bookcases filled with volumes of legal literature. Cedric sat behind the desk, a tall, lean man in his 60s, with a neat gray beard and shrewd gray eyes. On the other side of the desk were 4 chairs, 3 of which already had people sitting in them. Dexler, tense in his immaculate dark suit. Next to him, Siobhan, elegant in a black slip dress, with a string of pearls around her neck that I knew was worth more than my car. And, what surprised me, Calvin, the older of the twins, as intense as his father, wearing a school uniform that seemed too formal for a 15-year-old. Siobhan noticed me first. Her eyes narrowed, and then her lips stretched in a smile that was never genuine. Cedric stepped up to meet me. Eloise, his voice was warm but formal. Minus, glad you could make it. Hello, Cedric. I nodded to him, then to the others. Dexler, Siobhan, Calvin, I didn't expect to see you here. Kelvin shrugged awkwardly, not meeting my gaze. Dexler stood up, hesitantly stepping toward me. Mom? Why is only one of the boys here? I interrupted, turning to him. Tristan has an important practice today, Siobhan answered in his place. He couldn't miss it. The coach thinks he has a chance of getting an athletic scholarship. I see. I shifted my gaze to the empty chair next to Dexler, the only seat available. As I headed toward it, Siobhan suddenly stood up and moved so that she blocked my path. Her movement was so smooth that it might have looked random from the outside, but I knew it wasn't. I apologize, I said, trying to step around her. She didn't budge. Her eyes, cold and calculating, met mine. You're not mentioned here, she said quietly enough for only me to hear. Why did you even come? Dexler didn't seem to notice this exchange, or chose not to. He ducked his gaze into his hands folded in his lap. Siobhan. Cedric's voice was calm but firm. Dash, please take your seat. We are about to begin. She flashed another glance at me, then stepped back, allowing me to make my way to a chair. I sat down, feeling my body tense. Dexler was sitting so close I could have touched his arm, but there was a gap between us. Good morning, everyone, Cedric began when we were all seated. We are gathered here for the reading of Roland Henry Brookhaven's last will and testament. I should note that it is unusual for a minor to be present, but since Roland has left a special directive about his grandchildren, I think it is appropriate. He glanced at Calvin, who straightened in his chair, suddenly interested. Before we begin, Cedric continued, I would like to remind you that the last will of a deceased person is legally binding, provided it is made in accordance with the law, which in this case it is. This will has been duly probated and registered. Cedric opened the folder in front of him and extracted several pages stapled together. This is the last will and testament of Roland Henry Brookhaven, dated September 18th of last year. He gave me a quick glance, and I thought I saw a twinkle in the corner of his eye. 3 weeks before he passed away, 3 weeks before he died, I suddenly remembered that that was when his and Cedric's secret meetings had become more frequent. Let's begin. Cedric put on his thin metal-rimmed glasses and began to read. I, Roland Henry Brookhaven, being of sound mind and sound judgment, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and attachments thereto. Above all, I leave everything to the one who never betrayed my wife, Eloise Margaret Brookhaven. Cedric paused, glancing over his glasses. There was dead silence in the room. I couldn't believe my ears. Everything? Me? Siobhan straightened abruptly, her face pale as suddenly as if someone had erased all color from it. What? She breathed out. No, that's impossible. Cedric ignored her, continuing to read. To my wife Eloise, I leave all of my property, including but not limited to our family home at 32 Maple Street, all bank accounts, stocks, and securities, my Brookhaven Heritage Antique stores with all assets and inventory, all art, antiques, and personal effects in my possession at the time of my death. I felt the air leave my lungs. Roland had left me everything, absolutely everything. This is absurd. Siobhan's voice cut through the silence, an octave higher than usual. It can't be legal. He changed his will 3 weeks before he died. When he was sick, obviously he wasn't in his right mind. I assure you, Mrs. Brookhaven, Cedric replied calmly. Your father-in-law was perfectly sane at the time he made this document. I have a doctor's report to prove it. Besides, I was a witness myself, and I can confirm that Roland knew exactly what he was doing. But it's not fair. Siobhan turned to Dexler, who was sitting as if struck by thunder. Dexler, say something. It's your father. He couldn't disinherit you. If you'll allow me to continue, Cedric interjected. The will hasn't been read in its entirety yet. He turned back to the document. I realize that this decision may seem harsh on my son Dexler James Brookhaven. However, I trust that my wife Eloise, who has always been characterized by fairness and kindness, will dispose of this property as she sees fit, with the best interests of all members of the family in mind. For my grandchildren, Calvin and Tristan Brookhaven, I have created educational trusts that they will have access to when they reach their 18th birthday. These funds are solely for their tuition at the college or university of their choice and cannot be used in any other way by their parents or guardians. Siobhan opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find the words. Her face took on a frightening hue, and her hands clenched into fists so tight that her knuckles turned white. Dexler finally spoke, his voice sounding confused. I don't understand. Why did father do this? Cedric took off his glasses and placed them carefully on the table. Roland left a letter for you, Dexler, and a separate one for Eloise. He asked me to give them to him after the will was read. He took 2 sealed envelopes out of the folder and handed them to us. Mine was inscribed in Roland's familiar neat handwriting. To my Ellie. It's all a mistake, Siobhan insisted, her voice now dangerously low. We'll contest the will. Eloise obviously influenced him in some way when he was weak. It's a classic case of undue influence. Mom would never do something like that, Calvin suddenly spoke, causing all of us to turn toward him. I was startled, not just by the fact that he called me Mom. He hadn't done that since he was 5, but by the firmness in his voice. Shut up, Calvin. Siobhan cut him off abruptly. You don't know anything about this. I know, Grandpa, he objected, suddenly bold, and I know Grandmother. Grandfather always said she was the most honest person he knew. Siobhan looked as if she'd been punched. She shifted her gaze from her son to me, and I saw something new in her eyes, not just anger or disappointment, but real hatred. You, she hissed, you turned him against us. You pretended to be the victim all these years while you manipulated Roland to get your way. I felt the heat rising to my cheeks, but I forced myself to stay calm. Siobhan, I had no idea Roland changed his will. This is as much a surprise to me as it is to you. Lies. She practically spit the word out. You were always more cunning than you appeared. That mask of submission and humility of yours, it was all an act. You knew what you were doing. Siobhan, please. Dexler intervened, his voice sounding tired. Don't. He turned to me, and I was pained to see in his eyes not just disappointment, but suspicion. He didn't believe me. My own son thought I was capable of such manipulation. Mom, he began, and I could hear how hard he was struggling with each word. I want to believe that you didn't push your father into this, but you have to understand what it looks like. He always said the business would go to me. Perhaps the letter will explain his motives, Cedric said quietly, nodding at the envelope in Dexler's hand. With trembling fingers, my son opened the envelope and unfolded the sheet. His eyes raced over the lines, and his face gradually lost color. When he finished reading, he looked as if he'd been kicked in the butt. What is it? Siobhan asked demandingly, snatching the letter from his limp fingers. She ran her eyes over the text, and I saw her face contort with rage and disbelief. "It's a lie," she whispered, and then she said it louder. "Lies! It's all slander." "Give me that." Dexler took the letter back, folded it, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. His face was dead pale, and his gaze was blank. Calvin stared wide-eyed at what was happening. "What's in the letter?" he asked quietly. No one answered him. Siobhan jumped to her feet, her body literally vibrating with rage. "We will contest this will," she announced, looking straight at me. "We'll prove that you manipulated him, that he wasn't in his right mind. We won't let you steal what belongs to our family." "Siobhan," Cedric's voice was calm but with a note of steel, "I would recommend that you consult an attorney before pressing charges. The will is legally impeccable and fully complies with all legal requirements. I have a medical report of Roland's capacity at the time of signing, as well as a videotape of the signing process where he clearly states his intentions." Siobhan stared at him, her nostrils flared with anger. "You were in cahoots with him," she hissed. "You helped him evade the law." "I performed my professional duties in accordance with my client's wishes," Cedric replied, not giving in to the provocation. "And I would advise you to watch your words, Mrs. Brookhaven. Slander is a serious charge." Siobhan turned to Dexler. "We're leaving, now, and we're going to talk to a real lawyer, not your father's henchman." Dexler rose slowly, moving like a man in a trance. He gave me a look that was a mixture of hurt, bewilderment, and, what hurt the most, deep distrust. "Mom," he began, but Siobhan tugged at his arm. "Don't talk to her," she ordered. "Not now, not here. We'll discuss everything later." She turned to Calvin. "Come on now." Calvin stood up uncertainly, giving me a guilty look. "Grandmother," he whispered, "I'm sorry." That simple gesture, this treating me like a grandmother for the first time in years, touched me to the core. I wanted to say something to him, to assure him that everything would be okay, but the words stuck in my throat. Siobhan practically shoved them both out of the study, slamming the door so hard that the spines of the books on the bookshelf shook. Cedric and I were left alone. I sat there, still clutching the unopened envelope, unable to believe what had just happened. "Could they really contest the will?" I asked finally. Cedric shook his head. "They can try, but they don't stand a chance." Roland was very thorough. He anticipated this reaction and took every precaution. The record of his explanations regarding the changes in the will, the medical report, the witnesses, all impeccable. I nodded, feeling strangely numb. "What was in the letter to Dexler?" Cedric sighed. "I don't know the exact contents, Eloise. Roland sealed those letters himself, but I can guess from his comments when we made the will. He recognized something that deeply disappointed him." I remembered Dexler's pale face, the shock and disbelief on Siobhan's face. "Read your letter," Cedric said softly. "Maybe it will give you some answers." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded the piece of paper. "My dear Ellie," the letter began, written in Roland's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've just learned of my last decision. My legs were barely holding me up when I stepped out of Cedric's office." Roland's letter, neatly folded, lay in the inside pocket of my coat, right in front of my heart. His last words, his explanation, his goodbye. It was all too much to comprehend at once. The cold air outside brought me to my senses. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk glistened with moisture, reflecting the gray sky and the lights of the storefronts. I walked slowly to my car, as if half asleep, not noticing the passers-by. It wasn't until I got behind the wheel and closed the door that I allowed myself to take a deep breath. Roland, what have you done? I whispered, looking at the envelope I still clutched in my hand. Opening it again, I reread the letter, slower this time, trying to realize every word. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you just found out about my last decision. I'm sorry I didn't warn you beforehand. I didn't want to put this burden on your shoulders while I was still alive. I know you're confused and maybe even angry with me right now. You were never interested in business and finances, always trusting me with that part of our lives. Now I've left you our entire fortune, and you probably don't understand why. Allie, I discovered something that broke my heart. 2 weeks before I changed my will, I accidentally witnessed a conversation between Dexler and Siobhan. They didn't know that I had come home from the hospital earlier than usual. They were talking about plans for the future after my death. Dexler was telling Siobhan about an offer he had received from Lexington Investments to buy out all of our antique stores immediately after my death. The sum was impressive, but far below the real value of the business. Siobhan insisted that it was a great deal that would give them the freedom to finally do what they want to do, not what the old man expects. But that's not what broke my heart, Ellie. It was what followed. Dexler was worried about you, asking how you'd live if they sold the house. And Siobhan, she said there's always room for you in a decent nursing home. 43 years of marriage, 39 years of a business I built from scratch. They were going to throw it all away before they could even bury me. I went back to the hospital that night with the clear realization that I had to protect you and everything we had built together. The next day, I called Cedric. Ellie, I always believed that our son deserved the legacy we had created. I believed he would carry on my life's work, preserve it, and increase it. But now I know it's just an asset for him to cash in at the first opportunity. I leave everything to you, not as punishment for him, but as protection for you. I know you're fair. I know you would never leave our son with nothing. But now the decision is in your hands. You can turn the business over to someone you trust, or you can sell it if you want. You can secure our grandchildren's future. You can build on what we've built together. Cedric will help you sort out all the legal and financial matters. He knows my wishes and will guide you, but the final decision is always yours. Ellie, my love, my life, my heart. I know this is a difficult and lonely time for you. I know that this decision could drive Dexler further away from you, but I believe in your strength and your wisdom. You've always been stronger than you thought. Remember the day we met in the library? You said then that Jane Eyre was the story of a woman who never gave up her dignity and independence. You're the same way, Ellie. You always have been. And now that I'm gone, it's time for you to remember that. I have loved you every day of our lives together, and I will always love you, no matter where I end up. Yours forever, Roland. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I finished the letter. Not tears of grief, but of some strange release. Roland hadn't just left me a fortune. He'd given me back the dignity that had been undermined for years by Siobhan's neglect and Dexler's weakness. Nursing home. The words stung like a stigma. They planned to send me to the asylum like a useless thing, to get rid of the last reminder of my obligations, and sell the business that Roland had spent a lifetime building. That was to be our family's legacy. I sat in the car without starting the engine, letting the waves of realization roll in one after another. Anger, hurt, bitterness, but underneath it all, something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Power, freedom to make decisions. The phone in my bag vibrated, bringing me back to reality. Dexler's name popped up on the screen. I stared at it for a long minute, then dismissed the call. Not now. I'm not ready to talk to him now. I started the car and drove home, where I could think about everything that had happened. On the way, I stopped at a small coffee shop that Roland and I frequented. For the first time in a long time, I ordered a double espresso instead of my usual tea, a small act of defiance against habits and expectations. At home, the first thing I did was call Cedric. "Are you okay?" he asked after greeting me. "It's been a rough day. I'm in shock, but I'll be fine," I replied, surprised at the firmness in my own voice. "Cedric, I read Roland's letter. He mentioned that you know what he wants and that you can help me with my finances and business." "Yes, of course." His voice became businesslike. "I've prepared all the necessary documents. When you're ready, we can meet and discuss the details. You don't need to make any decisions right now. I know I don't, but I need to understand exactly what I've inherited. How much is it, significant?" Cedric was silent for a second. "Eloise, Roland's fortune is significant. In addition to the house and personal property, you now own a chain of 4 antique stores that generate a steady income, shares in several companies, and accounts and investments totaling about $3 million, plus $1 million worth of life insurance. And, of course, educational trust for the boys totaling $250,000 each." I felt my breath catch. I knew Roland was successful, but I hadn't realized the scale. "Yeah, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Cedric replied softly. Dash. "Just know that you are secured for the rest of your life, and you can do what you think is right with those funds. Roland has made sure that you have a choice." After talking to Cedric, I sat in Roland's chair, trying to make sense of my new situation. In one morning, I had gone from a potential resident of a decent nursing home to a wealthy woman with complete freedom of action. The phone rang again. This time it was Siobhan. I rejected the call without hesitation. A minute later, a message came through. "Eloise, we need to talk. It's about the future of our family. Please call me back." I grinned. Our family. How easily she uses that phrase now that she needs something. Over the next hour, the phone rang 4 more times, twice Dexler, twice Siobhan. I didn't answer once. Then came a text from Dexler. "Mom, please let's meet. Just you and me. We have a lot to discuss." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to agree immediately, to rush to him, to try to rebuild what had been destroyed. But the other part, the part that had grown stronger after reading Roland's letter, knew I shouldn't rush. I wrote a short reply. "I need time, Dexler. I'll get back to you when I'm ready." Then I muted the phone and went to Roland's office. Now that I knew I owned the business, I needed to learn more about it. I'd never taken much interest in the business side of Roland's affairs, content with the fact that he was providing for our family. Now it was my responsibility. I spent several hours going through the folders Roland kept in his office: profit and loss statements, leases, insurance documents, all neatly laid out and signed in his small, clear handwriting. I didn't understand many of the terms, but the big picture was starting to emerge. Antique business was not just a hobby of Roland, as I once thought. It was a carefully constructed empire that brought in a steady income. Each of the 4 stores had its own specialization. The first, furniture; the second, jewelry and watches; the third, books and printed materials; the fourth, art and decor. Together, they formed the Brookhaven Heritage brand, which was well known among collectors across the country. Among the papers, I found the offer from Lexington Investments mentioned in Roland's letter. Dated 2 months earlier, it contained a preliminary estimate of the value of the business and an intention to purchase it outright. The amount, while impressive, was indeed well below the actual value. It was more than an offer. It was an attempt to get Roland's business on the cheap, taking advantage of his death and the inexperience of his heirs. In the margins of the document, I saw a notation made by Roland's hand. Never. This is not what I built my legacy for. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. I went to the window and saw Dexler's car in the driveway. He stood on the porch alone, without Siobhan, hunched over as if under the weight of an invisible load. Part of me wanted to open the door immediately, to hug my boy, to tell him everything was going to be okay. But the other part, the part that had read Roland's letter, that had seen my son's neglect over the years, that had heard the plans to send me to a nursing home, that part held me in place. Dexler called again, then again. Finally, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. My phone, muted, flashed on the table. I watched Dexler wait, then lower his head, giving up. He stood for a few more minutes, then slowly wandered to his car and drove away. I experienced a strange feeling, a mixture of bitterness and release. For years, I had been available to them at all times, ready to drop everything to help, to support, to comfort, and for years they had taken it for granted. Now, for the first time, I said no, not even with words, just with action. At 10 o'clock, a text came from Siobhan. "We know you're home." Dexler stopped by. "This is ridiculous, Eloise. We're a family. We should be discussing important things like this together. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we'll come to see you. Please be reasonable." The tone of the message, condescending, commanding, sure she was right, was so typical Siobhan. Be reasonable. That always meant do as I want. I didn't respond. The morning brought a clarity of thought like I hadn't experienced in a long time. After breakfast, I called Cedric and made an appointment to meet at his office at 11 o'clock. "I'm ready to learn more about business and how to run it," I told him, "and I need advice on how to proceed." "Of course, Eloise." I could hear the approval in his voice. "I'd be glad to help." I dressed with care, the dark blue suit that Roland had always called my battle outfit, the pearls, the neat hair. Today, I wasn't just a widow, a grieving mother, or a forgotten grandmother. Today, I was a business owner, a woman of wealth and responsibility. Before leaving, I checked my phone. 3 more missed calls from Dexler, 1 from Siobhan, and surprisingly, 1 from Calvin. I would have talked to him, but I had other things to do right now. Cedric greeted me with the respect usually reserved for important clients. We spent 2 hours discussing business details, financial issues, management options. "You have several options," he explained. "You can sell the whole business if you don't want to do it. You can hire a manager and retain control, but not get involved in the day-to-day operations. Or you could get more involved, learn the business, maybe even bring something new to the table." It got me thinking. What would Roland's advice be? Cedric smiled. "He said you'd surprise everyone, including yourself, if you were given a chance. He believed there was potential in you that you didn't even know you had." Those words touched something deep inside me. Roland always believed in me more than I believed in myself. "I don't want to sell," I said firmly. "At least not right now. I want to know more, to understand what made this business successful, what was special about it for Roland. Maybe I'll find my place in it too." "That's an excellent solution." Cedric nodded. "I can arrange a meeting with the managers of all 4 stores. They've worked with Roland for years and know the business inside out. I also suggest hiring a financial advisor to help you with your investments and accounts." "Yes, that would be helpful." I paused. "What about Dexler? Was he involved in the business?" Cedric shook his head. Minimally. He stopped by the stores a couple times a year, but never showed any real interest. Roland had tried to get him involved, but he faltered. But Siobhan didn't think the antique business was prestigious enough. I finished for him. "Something like that," Cedric agreed tactfully. Roland hoped that someday Dexler would change his mind, see the value in what had been created. But as time went on, he didn't. We discussed a few more things, including how to deal with Siobhan and Dexler's imminent visit. You don't have to accept them, Cedric reminded me, especially if you don't feel ready for this conversation. I can mediate if you prefer. I shook my head. No, I have to do this on my own, but I'd appreciate some advice on what to say and what not to say. By 2:30, I returned home with a head full of new information and a strange sense of excitement I hadn't felt in a long time. Roland had opened a new door for me, a new opportunity. Not just a fortune, but a chance to start a new chapter in life when I thought all the chapters had already been written. At 2 o'clock, right on schedule, Dexler's car appeared in the driveway. He and Siobhan got out. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in their postures, the determination on Siobhan's face, the uncertainty on her son's face. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and went to open the door, not as a frightened widow, not as a neglected mother, but as a woman who had finally gained control of her life. I leave everything to the one who has never betrayed my wife. Those words of Roland now sounded in my ears, not like a curse, but like a blessing. He'd given me not just an inheritance, but a chance to restore my dignity, to find a new purpose, and I wasn't about to miss that chance. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. There was a second of surprise on Siobhan's face, which she quickly hid behind her usual mask of polite condescension. Dexler stood behind her, pale and tense. Eloise? Siobhan nodded, as if we were meeting at a social gathering rather than at the doorstep of the house she planned to sell by evicting me. Thank you for agreeing to talk. I didn't agree, I said calmly. You made the appointment. The remark confused her for a moment, but she recovered quickly. Well, we're here, and we need to discuss the situation. She paused, then added with a strained smile. As a family. Come in. I stepped back, letting them into the house. We can talk in the living room. I deliberately didn't offer them tea or coffee like I'd done before. This was not a friendly meeting, but a business meeting. Siobhan chose the chair that Roland had always preferred, perhaps intentionally. Dexler sat on the sofa, nervously clasping his hands in his lap. I took the chair opposite them both, feeling a strange confidence that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house that now belonged to me unconditionally. So, Siobhan began, not waiting for me to speak. Yesterday was, unexpected for all of us. For some more than others, I remarked. Siobhan ignored my comment. We want to propose a civilized solution that takes into account the interests of the whole family. She leaned forward with the look of someone accustomed to making good deals. Roland was obviously not himself when he changed the will. We could challenge it in court, but that would be painful for everyone. Especially for you. I looked directly at her. Considering that, as Cedric assured me, the document is legally flawless, and you have no chance of winning such a case. Siobhan tensed, but continued with the same feigned calm. This isn't about legal technicalities, Eloise. It's about family. It's about what's morally right. Morally right? I couldn't hold back a short laugh. You want to talk about morality? Mom, Dexler finally spoke, his voice sounding pleading. Please, let's just talk about this quietly. What is it, Dexler? I turned to him. The fact that your wife was planning to put me in a nursing home while you sold off the business your father had spent a lifetime building? Dexler turned even paler. That, it was just a discussion. We weren't going to. Don't lie to me. My voice was quiet but firm. Roland heard your conversation. He wrote it down in the letter he left me. Siobhan cast a quick glance at Dexler, then turned to me again. We were just discussing options. You misunderstood. I didn't mention the details of that conversation, Siobhan, I pointed out. How do you know I've misunderstood something I haven't said yet? She fell silent, caught off guard. Then she sighed and changed tactics. Look, Eloise, we've all been overreacting. Roland heard a private conversation taken out of context and made an impulsive decision. But the fact remains, this business was supposed to go to Dexler. That had always been the plan. Roland's been talking about it for years. And now the plan has changed. I met her gaze calmly. It wasn't an impulsive decision. Roland had thought it over carefully, discussed it with a lawyer, made sure everything was legally flawless. But it's not fair. Siobhan burst out, her mask of politeness finally cracking. Dexler is his son, his only child. The business should have gone to him. Why, Siobhan? I tilted my head. What had Dexler done to deserve the business? Roland's been trying to get him involved for years, but he's never shown any interest. He doesn't even know how the stores work. It's an inheritance, she insisted. It's passed down by blood, not by merit. No, I shook my head. It's a business that Roland built from scratch, and he had every right to decide who to leave it to. Siobhan opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly holding back an angry tirade. Dexler looked utterly lost, as if the ground was going out from under his feet. Mom? He looked at me with desperation in his eyes. I didn't realize Father was so upset about that conversation. It was just an idea Siobhan had suggested. We weren't going to go behind your back. But you went behind Roland's back, I said quietly, planning to sell his life's work before he died. We were in a difficult financial situation, Dexler said suddenly, his voice trembling. Yeah, we're in trouble, Mom. I looked at him more closely. Beneath the mask of business suit and well-groomed appearance, I could see signs of stress I'd overlooked before. The shadows under his eyes, the tense shoulders, the nervous twitching of his fingers. What's the problem, Dexler? He looked at Siobhan as if seeking permission. She pressed her lips together, but nodded. We owe a lot of money, he admitted quietly. Siobhan's boutique has been unprofitable for 3 years. We put all our savings into it, mortgaged our house. And then I made some risky investments, trying to make things right, and he stopped talking, his gaze lowered. And I lost. I finished for him. He nodded without looking up. If we don't find the funds in the next few months, we're going to lose the house. We may have to declare bankruptcy. I stared at my son, trying to figure out how I felt. Pity, disappointment, anger? All of them, I guess. Why didn't you go to Roland for help? I asked. While he was alive? We didn't want to bother him, Siobhan answered quickly. He was sick, and so you thought it would be easier to wait until he was dead and get it all at once, I finished. No, Dexler exclaimed, but his protest sounded unconvincing. We just, we thought the inheritance would solve our problems, and then we could fix everything, including sending me to a decent nursing home. I couldn't resist the quip. Dexler flinched as if from a blow. It was just a phrase, Mom. We would never do that. But I could see in his eyes that he wasn't sure of his own words. And frankly, neither was I. So, I straightened in my chair. You didn't come here to discuss the moral validity of the will. You've come because you're desperate for money. Siobhan opened her mouth to object, but Dexler beat her to it. Yes, Mom. He looked defeated. We need help, and I don't know where else to turn. There was silence. I looked at my son, remembering the little boy Roland and I had raised with so much love and hope. How had we gotten to this point? At what point did we lose him? If I understand correctly, I finally said, You want me to give you the business and the money so you can pay off your debts. Not all of it, Siobhan put in quickly. Of course you can keep this house and enough money to live comfortably. How generous. I couldn't hold back the irony. To let me keep what is already legally mine. Siobhan blushed with anger, but held back. We just want to find a solution that will suit everyone. A solution that will save you from the consequences of your own decisions. I shook my head. You know, Siobhan, I've always wondered why you were so insistent on keeping Dexler away from us. Now I understand. You were afraid that Roland would see what was going on, that he'd realize how poorly you were handling your finances. That's not true. She jumped to her feet. I was trying to start my own family without constant interference from his parents, and the boutique was successful until the economy collapsed. Siobhan, Dexler put his hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. Please. She shook off his hand and turned to me again. Do you think you've won, Eloise? Do you think Roland did you a favor by leaving everything to you? He just wanted to control us even from the grave. And now you're carrying on his work, enjoying your little power over us. I stood up, suddenly feeling tired of this conversation. I need to think, I said, about what I've heard today and about what I'm going to do next. I'm going to ask you to leave now. Mom, please. Dexler stood up too, desperation in his voice. We could lose the house. The boys, the boys are covered by educational trusts, I reminded him. Roland had taken care of them. And as for you two, I need time. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Siobhan looked like she was about to continue the argument, but Dexler shook his head quietly. Okay, Mom. Thanks for listening to us. He turned to walk, then stopped. Yeah, I'm sorry. About everything. About the way we drifted away from you and Dad. About how we didn't appreciate you. I stared at him, trying to see the sincerity in his words. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or just a tactic to get what he needed? Take care of yourself, Dexler, was all I could say. After they left, I sat in the silence of the living room for a long time, trying to digest everything I'd learned. The financial problems explained a lot of their behavior of the last few years. Siobhan's insistence, her constant attempts to influence Roland, her irritation when those attempts didn't work. The phone interrupted my musings. Calvin's number. This time I answered. Grandma? His voice sounded uncertain, like he didn't expect me to answer. Hello, Calvin. I was surprised at how nice it was to hear him say that. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you. Alone? He lowered his voice, and I realized he didn't want his parents to hear him. Of course. I tried to sound calm, not letting my surprise show. When do you want to meet? Can I come over now? On a bike? There was so much hope in his voice, I couldn't say no. Sure, honey, I'll be waiting. 20 minutes later, he was on my porch, a tall, thin teenager with serious eyes that looked so much like Roland's. He was shuffling from foot to foot, clearly nervous. Come in, I let him into the house. Are you hungry? I can make you something. No, thanks. He made his way into the living room and sat down on the couch where his father had recently sat. I won't be staying long. My mom thinks I'm in extra math class. I understand. I sat down across from him. What did you want to talk about, Calvin? He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I wanted to apologize for the way Tristan and I acted all those years ago, for barely knowing you and Grandpa. It was wrong. I was touched by the sincerity in his voice. Calvin, you have nothing to apologize for. You were children. You didn't make those decisions. But I'm older now, he insisted, and I see things I didn't see before. He stopped talking, then continued more quietly. I heard Mom and Dad talking about Grandpa's business, about how they're going to sell it, and about you, about how you're going to have to get a job somewhere. I didn't understand at the time, but now I know what they meant. I felt my heart squeeze. So Roland wasn't the only one who had heard their plans. Grandpa always told me that family was the most important thing, Calvin continued. To take care of each other, to be honest. And then I'd see the way he'd look at Mom and Dad when they didn't see it. With such disappointment, he looked up at me with eyes full of worry. I don't want to be like that, Grandma. I don't want Grandpa to be disappointed in me. I reached out and squeezed his palm. He was never disappointed in you, Calvin. He loved you and Tristan unconditionally. But we saw him so rarely, regret sounded in his voice. And I always pretended I didn't care because Tristan did it and Mom approved. But I do care. I've always wanted to get to know you both better. I felt tears coming to my eyes. It's never too late to start, Calvin. He nodded, then continued more tentatively. I was wondering, is it true that Grandpa left educational trusts for us? Yes, I confirmed. Dash college money for you and Tristan. You'll have access to them when you turn 18. Relief flickered across his face. That's, that's good, because I don't think my parents could pay for college. They're having money problems. They try to hide it, but I can hear them fighting at night. I know, I said softly. Your father told me today. Calvin looked surprised. Really? He didn't usually like to talk about things like that. Circumstances forced him to be frank. I decided not to go into details. Calvin nodded, then suddenly asked, Grandma, do you hate us for the way we've behaved all these years? The question struck me with its directness and vulnerability. No, Calvin, I answered without hesitation. I could never hate you. I've been disappointed, sad that we're not close, but I've always loved you both. You and Tristan are a part of Roland and me. How could I hate what we've created? His shoulders visibly relaxed, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from them. Tristan misses his grandfather, too, he said suddenly. He just doesn't show it. He thinks he has to be strong like Daddy. But I heard him crying the night after the funeral. That revelation touched me. So even the aloof Tristan wasn't as indifferent as he seemed. I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to know Grandpa better, I said. He was a wonderful man. Tell me about him, Calvin asked, about what he was like when Daddy was little. And I did, about Roland teaching Dexler to ride his bike, about summer camping trips, about reading him books before bed, about his first antique store, about how he found beauty in old, forgotten things. Calvin listened with bated breath, absorbing the stories of the family his own parents had stolen from him. When it was time for him to leave, he suddenly hugged me, awkwardly but sincerely. Can I come to see you? He asked. You don't have to tell your parents. Just talk sometimes. Of course, Calvin. I was touched by his request. I'm always happy to see you. When he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching his figure disappear into the distance. This unexpected visit had changed something inside me. It was as if a small ray of light had penetrated the darkness that had surrounded me since Roland's death. I went back to my husband's office and sat down at his desk. I opened a drawer, pulled out a blank piece of paper, and began to write. A plan, my own plan for the future, which included not only business and finances, but also my relationship with my family, with the son who had betrayed me, but probably deserved a second chance, with a daughter-in-law who was manipulative and scheming, but whose actions were driven in part by desperation, with my grandchildren, especially Calvin, who reached out to me, needing what only family could give. I wasn't about to make any rash decisions. Roland had given me the gift of time and independence. I could think about every step, weigh my options. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to just hand the business over to Dexler or Siobhan. Not now, when I was beginning to realize how important it was to Roland, how skillfully built. Not now, when I was just beginning to see it not just as a source of income, but as a legacy worth preserving. Nor was I going to let Dexler and Siobhan escape the consequences of their financial decisions by simply writing them a check. It wouldn't have helped them in the long run, wouldn't teach them to appreciate what they have, but I couldn't leave them completely without help either, especially since their problems were affecting my grandchildren. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thinking about the future, about the business that was now my responsibility, about the money I had to manage wisely, about a family that was broken, but perhaps not hopelessly so. You are stronger than you think, Roland had written in his last letter. Now I was beginning to believe he was right. Spring and terre haute always come suddenly. It seems like yesterday that the trees were bare, and today they are covered with tender green. Roland loved this time of year. A time of renewal, he said. A time for new beginnings. I stood at the window of my office in the Brookhaven Heritage Antique Shop, watching passers-by on the busy street. A lot had changed in the 3 months since the reading of the will. Most surprisingly, I myself had changed. My first week as a business owner was like jumping into cold water, shocking but invigorating. Cedric set up meetings with the managers of all 4 stores, and I spent long hours going over financial statements, inventory, and customer base. Instead of the boredom I expected, I found myself unexpectedly interested. Behind the dry numbers and specialized terms, I saw Roland's passion, his passion for antiques, his strategic vision. Jerry Weaver, the general store manager and oldest employee, became my mentor and an unexpected ally. An elderly gentleman with a neat beard and a keen eye, he had worked with Roland for over 20 years. Mrs. Brookhaven, he said at our first meeting, your husband always said you had a special eye for beauty. He thought you could bring a fresh look to the business. Did he? I was surprised. He never said that to me. Roland was a man of action, not words. Jerry smiled. But he consulted with you often, didn't he? Showed you new acquisitions? Asked your opinion? I remembered how Roland would bring home particularly interesting items, set them on the table, and ask me to choose the most valuable one. How he would nod, pleased when my choice matched his own. I thought it was just a game, a way to share his passion. Now I realized it was more than that. With the help of Jerry and the other employees, I began to learn the intricacies of the antique business. Each day brought new discoveries about pricing, about finding rare items, about the fine art of negotiating with collectors and dealers. To my surprise, many clients knew me by name. Roland, it turns out, often talked about me. "Oh, you're that Eloise!" exclaimed an elegant elderly lady, a regular customer when we met. "Roland always said you were a woman of impeccable taste." I can see now that he wasn't exaggerating. Gradually, I began to make my own changes in the business. Small ones at first, new merchandising, redesigned window displays. Then more substantial ones, special events for collectors, thematic exhibitions. One of my ideas, a series of lectures on literary works and antiques, which are mentioned in them, was unexpectedly popular. But the main decision was not about business, but about family. After much thought and consultation with Cedric, I devised a plan. For Calvin and Tristan, I increased the educational trusts, adding to the amount Roland had already allocated. Now, they didn't just cover college, but also allowed the boys to continue their education in graduate school if they so desired. On one condition: all decisions about their choice of school and major must be made by themselves, without pressure from their parents. As for Dexler and Siobhan, I decided not to give them direct access to money. Instead, I proposed restructuring their debts through a trust fund managed by an independent financial advisor. The fund would gradually repay their debts, but on the condition that they adhere to a strict financial plan and take a financial management course. This decision did not come easily to me. I knew it could be perceived as controlling and interfering in their lives, the same thing Siobhan had accused Roland and me of for years. But I also knew that simply giving them money would encourage the behavior that led them to their current problems. I set up a meeting in my new office, not at home, which would be too personal, but in a space where I was mistress of the situation. Dexler came alone, without Siobhan, which surprised me. She didn't want to attend, he explained, nervously adjusting his tie. She said she wouldn't be part of your power play. I nodded, not surprised by that reaction. Is that your decision, Dexler? Or hers? He looked at me with a sudden hardness in his gaze. Mine. Siobhan thinks we should fight. Contest the will. Hire a lawyer. But I just want this to be over. I want to find a way to move on. I scrutinized his face. Over the past weeks, he'd gotten noticeably gaunt, pale. The stress of his financial problems, the conflict with his parents, the collapse of his hopes for an easy solution, all of it had taken its toll on him. I propose a compromise, I said, and outlined my plan. Dexler listened attentively, not interrupting. When I was done, he was silent for a long time, thinking about it. You don't trust us, he finally said. I don't trust your financial decisions, I corrected him. And I have good reason to. He couldn't argue with that. Siobhan will be furious, he said after a pause. She'll find it humiliating. And you? He shrugged, looking suddenly very tired. I think, I think we're in no position to refuse help, whatever it may be. It wasn't acceptance, it wasn't gratitude, but it was a start. Think about it, Dexler. Talk to Siobhan. But remember that this is the only offer I will make. He nodded and got up to leave. At the door, he stopped. Mom, do you really believe we could send you to a nursing home? I looked at my son, a grown man with graying temples, who seemed so lost at this moment, so much like a little boy who was afraid of disappointing his parents. I believe you would have resisted the idea, but in the end, you would have yielded, as you have always yielded. He flinched at those words, but didn't object. We both knew it was true. The reply from Siobhan came a week later, in the form of a furious phone call. You have no right, she shouted, not caring about decorum. It's our money, our inheritance, and you're turning us into beggars begging for handouts. Siobhan, I tried to remain calm. If it were your money, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Roland left it to me, and I'm offering to help you on my terms. Your terms. She was almost choking with anger. You want to control our every move, every decision. This is financial abuse. No, Siobhan. I felt my own patience wearing thin. Financial abuse is planning to send my mother-in-law into a nursing home to take over her house. It's discussing the sale of the family business behind the back of the dying man who created it. There was silence on the other end of the line. I'm offering you a way out of the situation you've put yourself in, I continued. Take it or leave it, but don't you dare accuse me of violence. This isn't over, she hissed. We'll see who's who. No, Siobhan. I suddenly felt sorry for this woman, so blinded by her ambition that she couldn't see reality. This is exactly the end, an end to your manipulations, to your power over my son, to your games with our family. Roland put an end to that with his will, and I won't let you cross his last will. She hung up without a goodbye. A day later, Dexler sent a short message saying, "We accept your offer." In parallel with these family dramas, I continued to grow the business. To my surprise, I discovered a talent for it. My literary background, which seemed so far removed from commerce, actually gave me a special perspective on antiques. I saw in each object a history, a context, a cultural value. Jerry Weaver often said that I brought an academic approach to the traditional antiques business, and this set us apart from the competition. My themed exhibitions and lectures attracted new audiences, young collectors, students, history and literature buffs. I also began the process of rebuilding relationships with my grandchildren. Calvin now came to see me regularly, secretly at first, then openly, much to Siobhan's displeasure. We talked about books, about history, about his plans for the future. He was interested in antiquities, especially old books and manuscripts, and I often took him with me to auctions and on trips to look for new items. Tristan was more reserved. He had come to see me only once with Calvin, and he was wary. But when I showed him a collection of vintage sports equipment I'd recently acquired for the store, including a baseball bat signed by a legendary player from the 30s, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Is this really the real thing?" he asked, gingerly touching the worn wood. "Absolutely," I smiled. "We have all the documents to prove its authenticity. Do you want me to tell you the story of this bat?" He nodded, and for a brief moment the barrier between us disappeared. I wasn't deceived. I knew that rebuilding a relationship with him would take time and patience. But it was a start. By midsummer, I had made another important decision: to sell our house with Roland and buy a new one. Not because of financial considerations, but out of a need for a fresh start. The house where we had lived most of our lives together held too many memories, both joyful and painful. I felt stuck in the past, surrounded by those walls. The new house was smaller but brighter, with large windows and a garden overlooking a small lake. Modern but with character, just what I needed. I took only the things dearest to my heart with me. The rest I sold or gave to charity. It was a painful but necessary cleansing. Dexler helped me with the move, silently, without comment, but with a care I hadn't expected from him. Siobhan didn't show up, and I was glad of that. Our last face-to-face encounter was a week earlier, when she came to my store unannounced. "I hear you're selling the house," she said without greeting. The house that was going to be ours. I set aside the catalog I was looking through and looked at her. She looked as flawless as ever, but I saw something new in her eyes, not just anger or disappointment, but real hatred. "This is my house, Siobhan, and I have the right to do whatever I want with it," I said calmly. "You're doing this to spite us." She stepped closer. "You know we wanted this house and you're selling it, so we'll never get it." "I'm doing this for me." I stood up so our eyes were on the same level. "That's a strange concept for you, isn't it? That someone could make decisions without thinking about you and Dexler." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You destroyed our family. With your greed, your selfishness. You turned Roland against us, and now you're trying to turn the children against us." "No, Siobhan," I shook my head. "You're the one who destroyed our family. You systematically alienated Dexler from his parents. You deprived our grandchildren of grandparents. You turned our son into a puppet that dances to your tune. How dare you?" She started, but I didn't let her finish. "I dare tell the truth I've kept to myself for too long." My voice was quiet but firm. "For years, I've watched you manipulate Dexler, how you've turned him against us, how you've isolated our family. I kept quiet because I was afraid of losing my son for good. But you know what, Siobhan? I already lost him. You took care of that. And now I have nothing to lose by telling you the truth to your face." She backed off like I hit her. "You're a pathetic, lonely old woman," she hissed. "You will die alone, and no one will grieve for you." I smiled, suddenly relieved rather than angry. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. "It's better to die alone than to live surrounded by people who are waiting for you to die to divide your inheritance," I said. "Goodbye, Siobhan." I hope you find peace with yourself, because for now, you are at war with the world. She left, slamming the door so hard that the glass windows rattled. That was our last meeting. From then on, we communicated only through Cedric or Dexler, and only for necessary financial aid matters. 6 months after the reading of the will flew by like a day. I had moved into a new house, breathed new life into Roland's business, found my place in a world that seemed closed to me after his death. On a cool fall day, I sat on the terrace of my new home, watching the leaves swirl over the lake. Calvin was with me. He came every weekend, helping in the garden, talking about school, about his plans to go to college to study history. "Grandma," he asked, sitting down next to me, "are you happy?" I pondered the question, am I happy? After all the turmoil, after losing Roland, after breaking up with my son and daughter-in-law? "I am at peace with myself," I finally answered. "And yes, there is a kind of happiness in that." He nodded, as if he understood more than one would expect from a 15-year-old boy. "I'm glad I found you," he said simply. "That I have a grandmother." His words touched me to the core. "I'm glad too, honey, more than I can say." That night after Calvin left, I stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the lake reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. I thought about Roland, about his final gift to me, not just money and business, but a chance to find myself anew, to find the independence and strength I didn't know I had in myself. I leave everything to someone who has never betrayed, my wife. Those words, which had once sounded like a bomb in Cedric's office, now seemed like a blessing to me, a quiet declaration of love from a man who knew me better than I knew myself. Dexler and Siobhan remained cut off from my new life, by their own choice. I left the door open, especially for my son, but knew that as long as Siobhan was by his side, he wouldn't cross that threshold. It hurt, but it wasn't as sharp as it used to be. I learned to live with that loss, just as I had learned to live without Roland. Instead, I focused on my relationship with my grandchildren, especially Calvin, who reached out to me so genuinely, but also Tristan, who began to visit occasionally with his brother, still reserved but no longer hostile. I also found a new purpose in business, which had suddenly become my passion. Brookhaven Heritage thrived under my leadership, attracting new clients and gaining recognition in the antique community. I even began writing a book about antiques in literature, a project that combined my academic background with my new knowledge. Life went on, not at all as I expected, but perhaps exactly as it was meant to be. Roland gave me not only financial independence, but also a chance to discover a strength I didn't realize I had. A chance to become a woman who never gave up her dignity and independence. The very Jane Eyre I had told him about the day we first met. This was his final, most precious gift, and I was determined to justify his faith in me.